Alright, so for this project what we're going to be using is we're going to be using Hair Strand Designer, which you can find on ArtStation. This is an amazing product for creating hair strand textures made by the awesome Robert Ramsey, so pick that up if you haven't, yeah, let's get started. Alright, so in Hair Strand Designer what we're going to do is we're going to open up the project, and we're first going to be adjusting the texture or the strands, the spacing. What I like to do is I like to use 2 clumps for my for a couple of my thick versions, and I like to turn down the waviness and also increase the strand amount and make sure that the root and the tip are fading pretty well, because that's what's going to give it your life. I also make sure that the thickness of these strands is pretty thin so that it just looks more believable, and I also try to turn down the waviness as well to give it less waviness, but you can put waviness in your textures if that's something that you want to do, but I typically don't use waviness for my anime hair because you know, it's often than not more straight. So you can see when I click on these little buttons at the bottom, that's actually isolating each strand group so that I can work on it individually. You can see that there is a little couple of colorful pixels next to the name that indicates that you are using those specific strands in that and that you've adjusted it. So you've changed its properties individually. That's just letting you know which strands you've changed individually, as well as if you look next to the buttons down there, you'll see little colors next to the button that also indicates that you've changed properties of that individually. So if you click on the button and then you click in the viewport, you will be able to drag the strand around, the strand group around. And here we're generating it to make sure that we got it pretty decent, and we didn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn down the waviness even more on the ones that are too wavy, and I like to, as per the Robert Ramsey tutorial, I like to turn on color map and generate that only so that we are getting faster generation with the hair. And again, I try to make this as straight as possible. I do end up going back and redoing this because I didn't like the overall look of this when it came to putting more hair cards down, and that may be something that you're going to do. You may be going back and changing the texture overall, but that's normal. Alright, so after clicking on all of the ones that I want to activate and generate, I'm going to generate it, and I'm going to save off those textures. Little did I know that opening the program in a zip file, it doesn't allow you to export the textures. So all you have to do is export or extract the zip files to any location on your computer. Open up the file, and it'll have an autosave, which is very nice. It'll detect that there's an autosave in the newer version, and it'll allow you to get back to where you're going. So that's what I did. I ended up trying to export it, and it didn't work. Here you can see I'm trying to apply a blur. I didn't really like the results of the blur, so I ended up regenerating the maps and re-exporting it, simply because I didn't really like the blurring on that. And I'll show you what kind of blurring I actually like on the normal maps, because the normal maps don't really do a good job when it comes to aliasing. So I apply a motion blur to help with the aliasing, and I apply that down the length of the strand instead of against the strand, which is perpendicular. I apply motion down the strands, which will clean the aliasing up, which is very nice. And you could do that with any Photoshop editing program that allows you to do motion blur. Okay, so here we are in Blender. This is where we're going to set up our project, and we're going to start testing the strands so that the textures look decent. And you can see that I already have a texture in there, but that's an old texture. So we're just going to drop down a plane and we're going to assign a new material to that. And we're going to go into the shading properties. We're going to import our textures. First, it's going to be our color texture. And then we're going to Shift D to duplicate that, and we're going to import our normal map and our mask into the next two nodes. Right here is where I open up Affinity Photo and I touch up the normals because again, I didn't really like the aliasing on the normals. So we're bringing it in. You can see the bricking that's happening, and once we apply the motion blur, it gets rid of that. We're just saving it over the old normal, and then we're importing that. So for this, what I do is I add a color node, I invert the mask, and then I apply a transparent shader. And then I apply a mix shader to that, and then we plug in the transparent shader, we plug in the inverted mask color to the faction or the factor, and then we plug in the BDSF into the normal shader, or the other part. Right here we're just applying a map and bringing the strength down to 0.5, and you can see that it is not transparent. That's because I forgot to do that. Make it transparent in the viewport. So when you are doing this, you got to go over to the material and make sure over here that you are switching it to hashed. Okay, looking pretty good, looking pretty solid. I think that that's going to be pretty accurate for starting to place the hair cards, and then we're going to apply a subdivision surface and make sure that we put keep corners on our subdivision surface. Right here I am putting in edges and splitting up all of the hair. This is just, it makes it faster to do it this way than to constantly keep on having to UV it over and over again, and also applying the modifiers over and over again. Now I'm applying the space because I want to get as much of that card in the texture as I can, so I'm applying the space to that. And what we're going to do is we're going to, if you double tap G, it will slide the edge, and that should also retain the UVs as well. So we're deleting the polygons we don't need, and then we're splitting up each one of these polygons outside to make it its own object. By hitting P, you can split it. And now we're just going to move the origin to the cursor. So I'm Shift right-clicking and dragging the cursor to the part where I want to move the pivot, and then we go up to Object, and then we set pivot or set transform to the cursor location. This will help us with placing the hair cards later on. Now you don't necessarily have to do this, you can just model this entire thing with planes and then UV unwrap each plane that you model, but it's a little bit easier if you have a base to work off of. So now that we actually have all of those pivots set, what we're going to do is we're going to start placing this. So I place the cursor by her head, and then I press Shift S to set object to cursor after duplicating it. So what I do is I duplicate it, and then I Shift S to bring the cursor over to the head, and then I Shift S to bring the duplicated object over to the cursor. So it's just a little bit faster to place the hair cards. And then what I did there was I just applied a smooth shade on all of the cards, so that way I don't have to keep remembering to do it. And here is where I'm exporting the hair. You always want to try to export the hair early on, so that way when you are bringing it into whatever renderer you're going to render it in, that you can actually see what the hair is going to look like before you overdo it and you model too much and then you realize that you messed up somewhere. So I bring it in automatically to see if I can set up the material, and then check to see what the hair card textures are going to look like. Okay. So now we're just setting up the new hair textures on a new material. And I'll be going over my process for setting up the materials as well inside of Marmoset. I usually put the occlusion in the scattering and occlusion in the occlusion, and then I set that to dither. That way we just get kind of more life in the hair, and then I also set the anisotropic direction to the direction that I want. Also, custom normals on your hair will allow the anisotropics to work better, but I don't normally do that until the end, until I'm satisfied with the way the hair looks. But once you're done with the hair, you want to put like a custom normal. Usually you'll see like people who use a sphere and then they copy the normals from the sphere over to the hair, and they do that for trees, stylized trees and such. That's the same reason why they do it. So that the anisotropics works all throughout the model, because it has to do with the normals. Now, as you can see right here, I'm scaling each side of the polygon that I just modeled, so that we can scale down the textures more, making the strands thinner. That way I can stretch them more. And you'll notice the shape of the hair card is important. The shape of the hair card is basically kind of in a curve, and that allows you to hide more of the head. And also it gives the card the look of more volume. Okay. So again, I didn't realize that I actually had the wrong mask texture in there, so I ended up loading up the right mask texture, and then we go back in there and we just fix this. Okay. So you kind of have to think of like modeling hair as like modeling a bonsai tree. Sorry, Mr. Miyagi, but that's kind of what I do. I just kind of like model it in there, and I kind of shape it, and I just take my time. It's kind of like a Zen thing. You just take your time with it. The secret to it is basically just the shape of the hair cards and the textures. Because you can see these are pretty large polygons, and what I'm doing is I'm using the sides, the verts on the sides, to curl around and hide the head and give it more volume. So whenever I need to curl it more, I just add an edge loop in there, and I continue to curl it more. Okay. So looking at it from every angle, as you can see right here, what I'm doing is I'm adding more edges, and this will allow me to curl the hair more and make it look more natural. Doing the same thing right here, just kind of bringing the roots down, making sure that they align to the head, or that they go towards the head. These ones specifically, I want to try to get more closer to the head, because again, this is going to be the ones that are going to be hiding the head, hiding the scalp. But you can also color the scalp. You can color the scalp a different color, or you can make a mesh cap, whichever you want to do. But I'm trying to lower my geometry, so I'm just using the hair textures to do most of the work. And again, you can see that I didn't actually change the hair card textures yet, because that's going to come a little bit later on. Right now I'm just kind of testing to see what it's going to look like with more hair cards, and then we're going to go in there. This is actually when I do change it. I noticed that the hair is a little bit too wavy, and it auto-loaded my last settings. So now I can go in here without changing the UVs or anything. I can go in here and I can make those less wavy, because the textures are just a little bit too wavy. So I ended up changing that, because it makes the hair look like it's more wet, and I didn't really like that. So I ended up changing it to make the hair look more anime, more straight. Again, we're just regenerating it, and we're going to apply the motion blur after this, making sure everything looks alright, pretty decent. Okay, and you'll notice that in the hair cards it goes from thick to thin. Specifically, the reason why I did that, and the reason why every artist does that, is because you use the thicker ones to hide most of the head, to build up the main shapes of the hair, and then you use the thinner ones to give it more life and more variation. So that's what we're doing. We're essentially making a grid, or like a cap on the head, right? That's more of like a unified grid. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to hide the head and then create that big hair volume that you're trying to achieve. While the other ones, you know, they create the variation. So we have our thin and we have our thick, and right now we're just modeling that big hair cap piece. I got the idea from this when I was watching the hair tool add-on, and I love that add-on, but I don't like placing curves and I don't like working with curves, and I just realized, you know, I'm a modeler, that's what I do. So I thought that maybe I could achieve the same results just by modeling a grid on the head and then just splitting apart the grid into hair card shapes, splitting those hair cards up and then just making variation, and it ended up working pretty well. It doesn't look half bad. You know, it may not look as like realistic, but it does get the job done for what I need, and I feel like for me it's a little bit better of a workflow. I just need to practice more with it, but this is essentially what I'm going to continue to keep doing. I'm just going to place the cards like this, and I'm going to try to give it variation. So as you can see right here, I'm just placing another layer over that to give it more thickness, and we're placing the roots a little bit closer to the head. You'll also notice that I'm not extruding the planes. I'm placing the tips where they're going to go, and then I start cutting the plane in the middle, and then moving those edges. So essentially, like, because if you extrude it, what's going to happen is you're going to not get the textures. It's not going to extend the textures, unfortunately. But with this, I'm able to cut in between the polys and then move these around. Okay. And again, we're just kind of hiding the head and moving these around, taking our time, moving around these. Another thing you can do is you can also use the mirror modifier. I don't, when it comes to things that are directly in the middle of the head, I don't use the clipping because the normals will get messed up in the middle. So I don't use the clipping for that. I keep them all separate. Okay, here we are using the mirror, and I'm just pushing them closer, making sure that the textures don't overlap, because if you do get overlapping in your textures, it's going to look weird. You're going to have all these weird little issues. So I try not to have like overlapping in the textures. It just looks awful in my opinion, and probably everybody else's opinion. It just looks weird. So this is something that you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to practice pushing these cards in the direction that's going to help the look of it and the flow of the hair. Okay, you can see that from certain angles you can see that the cards look flat, and we just have to replace the hair textures in this one. That's one thing you're also going to want to avoid, is your hair cards looking flat. You don't want them to look flat, especially the ones on the top. You don't want them to really look flat, because when they look flat, that's when you know that they're hair cards. It just looks weird. So you want to give it volume, you want to give it shape. Try to push it to make it look like real hair. But yeah, that's essentially what I did. I just tried to make it look like actual hair. And we'll be putting layers upon layers on this, you know, to get it to look right. Here I am starting with the sideburns, and I'm again pushing the tips where they're going to go, and then I pull out the midsection to make it look like it has more volume, and then I pull the tips down more and taper them. And you can see right here I'm pushing the roots in the flowing direction that I want the roots to kind of look like they're growing from. That's also another thing you're going to have to practice, is practice where you're going to put your roots at, and where the roots are going to transition to the other cards, because it looks more realistic when you do that. As you can see right here, I inverted the selection. I duplicated it off, and then I inverted the selection, hid the other one, and now right here I'm making this one flat and a little bit more bubbled out, or bubbled in towards the head, because when you have like just one hair card coming off, it looks really weird when you have like this concave in the hair card. So I ended up duplicating it and using the other duplicate to make it look like it has more volume when it's coming off of the head. But there will be a lot of other things that I do in between this to make it look better. It kind of looks weird at the moment, but there are other things that's going to happen. Here I'm just kind of testing environments, trying to see what it looks like in different environments, see if it can look, see if I can go for kind of like a close environment of what I'm going for. And then this is like the closest that I get, so I'm just like, okay, well, this is the colors that I'm going for in my render, so I'll just stick with this one and we'll just continue. As you can see, I'm making the middle parts of the hair cards more tube shaped again to make it appear like it has more volume. And also making sure that the textures aren't overlapping. So kind of zooming in and seeing if the textures are overlapping with the head or with the card. Pushing it as close as I can, seeing how close I can get it without it actually overlapping. And right here, I actually ended up duplicating a piece of it off by using polygon selection mode, and then selecting a ring of polygons, and then duplicating that off, and then splitting it down the middle and making it its own hair card. I do that again right here, just duplicate it off, and then I start to make it more in like a tube shape, like I did with the other one, and then just kind of make it look like it has more life to it. Make sure that if you're using subdivision surface, you're not like adding too much to it, because you are increasing the polygon count every time you subdivide it. I only subdivide it whenever I need it to curl specifically how I need it. Otherwise, I leave it alone and let subdivision surface smoothen it out for me. As long as it doesn't look too like blocky. And right there you can see that I adjusted the UVs. I did that because I wanted to shift the textures further down the card. That's just another thing you're gonna do when you practice doing this, is you're just gonna learn how to shift the UVs, shift the edges in the UVs to help you with that. Again, placing the roots, adding the cuts, and then we are just shaping that in the direction that I want it to go, and then just kind of modeling it out. So if you're used to modeling it, or if you're used to modeling, then this is going to be pretty easy for you. You just sit there and you just go in and model it out, shape it, and make it tubular again, or in a tube shape, so that it just looks like it has volume. And then towards the tip of it, you want to start making it look like it's flat, so it looks like a tuft of hair coming off. But when it reaches more towards the head, you want to round off the card and make it look more like it's in a tube fashion. Here I'm using Epic Pen to kind of direct me where I want the hair to go, because it's really easy to see it in your mind, but it's hard to project it back into 3D. So what I'm doing is I'm using Epic Pen to kind of help me along with shaping it, and I usually do that sometimes. I'll use Epic Pen to help me to kind of visualize where I want to go with it and see if it'll work. And there I use the mirror modifier, and I noticed that the flow of the hair going into the sideburns doesn't look right, so I ended up duplicating a piece of the sideburn off, and then trying to get the sideburn to flow more towards the back and make it look more natural. It's very hard to do something like this, but you have to practice doing this. And you're not going to get it right away. It does take practice and learning how to see this, but you want to make sure that your roots are kind of flowing in a decent direction. Your hair's flowing in to a natural way. And again, I'm not the greatest when it comes to this, so I'm practicing more and more to make it look like it's more realistic. But yeah, as you can see right here, I'm kind of like fanning out the roots and trying to get it to look more like the roots are growing out of the sideburns and into the back. Because I don't want the, one part of hair to just start and then another part of the hair to just start. It just looks weird, so I ended up trying to get it to flow. Right here, I'm just kind of blending it with the other hair and making sure that it doesn't overlap. So as you can see, we do have a weird problem, but adding more hair usually fixes that, you know, because it allows you to hide a lot of those issues, a lot of those problems. I duplicated this off, and I'm trying to place it in a place that makes sense. So I'm kind of looking at the roots and going, okay, how can I place this? Then I invert the selection, hide the other one. Now, if you invert the selection and hide it, you can then use tab to exit out of edit mode, and you can see both of them. So everything that you've hidden will become visible again, and it really helps with editing the hair, so that you don't have to constantly go back in and unhide and rehide and unhide again. So just remember, when you hide something and then you hit tab on your keyboard, it's going to bring you back to object mode, and then those things that you hid will become visible again, so you can, you know, see the progress that you're making. Again, just placing the hair card, modeling it, cutting into it, modeling it, shaping it, putting the tips where I want the tips to go, and then once I put the tips where I want them to go, then I'll sit there and I'll start to shape up the hair card. So from the underneath of the hair card, you're going to bubble out the midsection of the hair card more to hide more of the head from that angle. So from the underneath, you're gonna basically bubble where the root is. You're gonna bubble that out more. Like, remember how we do it in a tube-like fashion? You're gonna bubble that out even more when it gets closer to the root, so that you can hide more of the head. And as you can see, I'm kind of trying to curl the hair card around the head to give it like that more tube-shaped look. And then I combine it with the mirrored objects so that we can create a mirror really fast. Again, duplicating that off, hiding the other ones, and now I'm just moving that. Again, hitting tab really fast will help me to bring back the other ones so that I can adjust these very quick and see where I need to place this so that they're not looking too weird. And then we're just placing those roots closer. And as you can see right here, this is when I start to try to bubble out the shape of it a little bit more. I'll go in there and I'll adjust that, but you'll see in a second I'll try to look from the underneath and bubble it out more. At least I think I do that one in this. I'm checking it from all angles to make sure that it's hiding and that it's naturally flowing with the hair. And again, I just duplicated off another one, and now I'm just editing that. Okay, we're just continuing to edit, making sure that it flows like it makes sense. And this will be just a part 1 video. I'll make another part where we're gonna go over laying down more layers, hiding the back, hiding the underneath, and also laying down like the thinner layers so that we get more transition. It's gonna look like it's transitioning better into the other ones. Because the thin ones aren't just about like layering over and giving you that kind of volume shape, but it's also about like transitioning it. Okay. Again, just changing the shape up, making it look more shapely. Looking at it from this angle, you can see there's a big old fat opening, and I'm like, okay, I gotta hide that. So I'm shaping it, I'm curling it more, and then just kind of hiding that. I end up flattening this and making it closer to the other hair cards because I don't want it to kind of go out too much to where it stretches the cards and then you can see through it. So I ended up kind of flattening that just a little bit. And there we go. We have more. And then you'll notice, like right here, I start to make a tube, just like we did in ZBrush. I made a tube and then I unwrapped that. Essentially, this is what you're doing. You're just modeling geometry, and you're just using that geometry kind of like a card. That's what I'm doing right here. I'm just kind of modeling the geometry and then using this as like a hair piece. You can do this with ponytails. You can do this with braids or whatever. If your imagination can think of it, then all it is just like coming up with how to do it in the workflow and if it looks good. So I'm just like going through each 2 of these, and I'm unwrapping the cards to it. That way, you know, we have thinner strands on the card, or thinner strands on the tube. And then we take these ones, we unwrap these again, so just hit U, unwrap it, and then it's going to unwrap it, and then we're just going to place it. And there you go. Now we have our tube that is hair, our hair tube, and we're just shaping it. And that's essentially all that you know, you can think of any shape you want as long as you can shape it to those cards. You have a hair piece that you can put on your character and make it look like hair. So here I am, just kind of extending it out. I was gonna make a like a thicker tail, but I ended up going against it because it didn't look right. But you know, if you can think of a way to shape this up and make it look like hair, then there you go. You know, you can just use this, and it'll look pretty decent. It does pull out the geometry amount, but if you delete polygons you don't need, I think that you can get away with it. Here I am just kind of placing that, see what it would look like. Doesn't look too good, so again, like I said, I ended up just scrapping it because it looks weird. I think that the planes would be a lot better. Here I am again, placing more layers. Just kind of making it thicker, placing more layers. Bubbling it out again by adding an edge in between the card and then pushing those out. Ultimately, I thought that this card was a little bit too thick. I think I did something about that. I might not have, but I think that it's a little bit too thick, so I might actually go in and change it. I don't remember. Yeah, here we go. So I ended up duplicating that piece off and then just kind of rotating it to the cursor and then adjusting that. Gives it a little bit more life. And again, you know, this hair piece right here is a little too flat, so I ended up adding an edge and then just making it more shapely. And right here, I noticed that like the hair ends up just going right to the horn. So I use some transitioning with that, just pushing the roots around and kind of trying to make it look like it's transitioning into the sideburn. And I will be adding more layers to the bangs. They look really thin at the moment, so duplicated that off, and again, we're just shaping it. You can duplicate, like if you see, like if you want to make it faster on yourself, you can just grab a row of polygons, duplicate that off. It's already UV'd, but if you need to, if you're stretching it too much, you can just re-UV it. But it's a lot faster than going in there and placing another one and then trying to get the plane to look like it's flowing in the right direction. It takes a lot longer to do that. Here I am just grabbing polygons, scaling them down, trying to make the textures reach closer to the tips. And then I end up moving the tips further down because I wanted to see what it would look like if it were thinner. Most of my focus has been on the sideburns, I've noticed. Here I am just using proportional editing to allow me to move the cards faster. And then again, you want to look at it from every angle to see if you can get rid of that flat look. You don't want the flat look. Here I am going into the bangs and kind of editing these to look a little bit more like how I want them to. I kind of want to have like an M shape on her bangs. So I ended up scaling those to make it look more like an M. And then we're going to do the same thing to these cards underneath. And you can see that I keep some of these separate because I'm never sure if it's going to look right. So it'd be easier for me to keep it separate and then delete it than it would be for me to combine everything and then have to go in and search for the ones that look weird. So I only combine them when I know that they're gonna look decent, or if I know that I can fix it. So here we are adding another like transition piece. This is gonna help us to covering a lot of the transitioning between the sideburn and the side of the hair. It's the same pattern as before, just going in there, placing the roots, placing the tip where I want it to be rotated, and then just adding all of the edges in between to make it look like it's you know, better shaped. And then I just pick a piece from that, duplicate it, and then we start to shape that one. I don't want to make it too close to the original one that I duplicated it from, because then it'll be apparent that I actually just duplicated it and pushed it down. So I try to go in there with proportional editing, and I try to change it more to make it look like it's not just the duplicate piece. Okay. That's going to help with the transition. So that's a little bit of a kind of like an insight as to the transitioning pieces. As you can see, I'm moving them, making sure that the roots and the textures aren't overlapping, and then ultimately I ended up changing the texture because I thought it was a little too thin for this part. So that was like a little insight as to what I'm going to be doing with those thin pieces. I'm going to be kind of using those to help with the transitions. And then these ones I ended up changing as well because I thought they were just a little bit too thin. Like you can literally see through the textures, and you can see the head through the textures. So I wanted those to be just a little bit thicker. Okay, well, that has been part 1 of the modeling. In part 2, we'll be finishing up the layer. It'll be a time lapse of finishing up the back piece with another, you know, voiceover. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, please do not hesitate to leave them below. I will try to answer them if you are confused about the process. If this has helped you, please leave a like. Think about subscribing or share it with somebody who might be having trouble. Again, this is all just modeling and putting textures onto the things that you model, so it's not really too complicated. The only thing that I would say that you need to practice is the shape of the cards and the textures. The textures are the biggest thing, because if the textures don't help you, then modeling all of these cards will be for nothing. Alright? So just make sure that you're practicing the textures, make sure you're practicing the cards, and yeah. Alright, take care guys, and thank you so much for watching.